Now back to the very interesting week, to say the least. We had, with our Russian counterpart, foes, enemies. Joining me now, Peter Emerson, who worked for 3 Democratic administrations, and Jen Kerns, a former spokeswoman for the California Republican Party. Jen, let me go to you first. The president stands shoulder to shoulder with Vladimir Putin, says that he has no reason to believe that Russia interfered with the United States elections in 2016, really casting real aspersions and real questions of the findings of the intelligence community in the United States and of his own Justice Department, who had just indicted that Friday before 12 Russians for interference, then gives a lot of praise to Mr. Putin, standing next to him. Then comes back to the United States and said, I missaid one word. I know you are a Republican. I know you've been a spokeswoman for the party, but isn't this a bit much for even Republicans to have to stand behind and support?
Well, I think that's why you saw several Republicans come out and voice their displeasure over this past week. It's hard to believe it's only been 5 days since the Helsinki summit. Seems like it's been about 5 years, right, Reverend? But look, I look at more what President Trump's actions have been here, and no president prior has been tougher on Russia than this president. Let's remember, it was President Barack Obama who told a Russian official that he would have more flexibility after the election. Not President Trump.
Yeah, but it was also President Barack Obama that said to the president of Russia, the same President Putin, you better stop it. So, I mean, when we saw President Obama in the room with Putin, it was a huge difference than what we saw with Trump all but deferring and bowing to Putin in Helsinki. I'm sure you didn't mean to bring up the analogy of Obama Putin with Trump Putin.
Well, 2 things here, Reverend. One is we don't know what took place, and I do believe the transcript will come out in the coming days about what took place between the 2 leaders and their translators. We also don't know, and we'll be finding out soon, what the 2 staff of the 2 countries were discussing. Let's not forget, this was a podium-to-podium diplomacy summit in order to move the ball forward on some other key issues like denuclearization and other things that are facing the U.S. and other nations. And we know that the staffs were left behind to hash out some details. And I know that those conversations were very harsh. Let's also look at the sanctions that have been placed on Russia by President Trump. Just this past April, President Trump placed very stringent sanctions on 17 of Vladimir Putin's inner circle. Those were strict sanctions that prohibit them from ever traveling to the United States again, from ever opening a bank account in the West again, and from ever being able to do business in the West again. And those are 17 of Vladimir Putin's inner circle. And you know, in a country like this, those people are propped up by oligarchs and the wealthy. That hit Vladimir Putin personally.
And propped up by Putin, Peter. In fact, the same Putin that this president was very, very deferential to. The point, though, I think Jen makes, Peter, is that we don't know what happened in those 2 hours. So we don't know if those sanctions were negotiated, if there was an agreement to compromise them. And now we have President Trump inviting Putin to the White House for part 2 of this kind of conversation and whatever is the follow-up to whatever they discussed in private. So we really don't know where it's going. But from the optics, it looks like Putin is way ahead on the scorecard of who's winning in this.
Putin is a judo master. He's the puppet master against Donald Trump's bluster and Big Macs. All these people defending Donald Trump talk about these sanctions, throwing a few diplomats out of the country, closing bank accounts or not allowing them to be open, a few oligarchs, means absolutely nothing. The national security issue is the fact that Donald Trump continues to say yes, or da in Russian, to Russian interference in the 2018 elections. I spent the last week talking with experts, nonpartisan experts, on voting machines, voting procedures, voting processes. This White House and this Congress have done absolutely nothing. You can be assured that Russia will be voting in the 2018 elections, and consequently, whatever happened in Helsinki, which we will never know, because oftentimes interpreters are asked to leave the room or documents are exchanged. So there isn't going to be a transcript that's entirely accurate. What is clear and truthful is that right now, the national security of this democracy is at risk because Trump has refused to say niet strongly enough, powerfully enough to Russian interference in our elections.
Well, I put
now,
forth.
Let me go back to you, Jen. You talked about staff meetings to staff meeting of the different staffs of the Russian president, the U.S. president. But we saw even a senior official of the Trump administration was caught off guard when our Andrea Mitchell informed him in Aspen that the president had invited Putin to the White House. So how are we supposed to depend or have any kind of trust in what the staffs discuss when the staff doesn't even know the president of the United States had invited the president of Russia to the White House?
Well, it is possible that not every staff member in the White House who was not working on that project directly did not know, especially if he was out of town or on vacation. But look, what Peter ought to know is what Rod Rosenstein himself said last Friday with the indictments of the 12 new Russians was that not a single vote total was affected in this, and not a single outcome of the election in the United States of America was affected by the attempted Russian meddling in our elections. So I think it's important here to listen to one of the guys that's been vilified by the right, including myself, when he says that the Russians were not successful in meddling. So you can't say that Russia voted in the election, because even Rod Rosenstein, one of President Trump's fiercest opponents here, admits that that clearly did not happen.
I thought Rod Rosenstein was the top official under Sessions in the Justice Department. I didn't know he was an opponent of the president. We got breaking news from you this morning. We didn't know that.
I don't think it's breaking news, but
the other thing I think is that they said that this was an ongoing investigation, so we don't know if Americans are not going to also be prosecuted or indicted, and where this is going to lead. This is the opening salvo. Just wanted to add that piece. Thank you both for being with me this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.